Hey guys, my guest today, Richard Lawrence, is going to tell us about his theory that religious figures may have come from different planets. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? I think you said okay. That's great. We're almost to the end of the week. Nice, nice, nice. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal need, we can get to you. It might take us a couple days because, like I said, California is huge. But we will get to you. In the case that we can't get to you, we do have mediums on staff who can phone you and talk to you about what may or may not be going on in your neck of the woods. And in most cases, if it is paranormal, they can settle down that energy so that when we do get out, so that until the point that we do get out there, you're not being, scared or harassed or anything like that by whatever's in your place. That being said, a lot of you are going to be watching on Facebook today. And for those of you that are doing that, welcome. And if you haven't signed up to follow us, please do so. But that's only if you like what you see and hear today. And also chat amongst yourselves in the chat room, and all that good stuff. And show me some love. Give me a thumbs up. Give me one of those heart things I can't do. Might as well do the Vulcan, greeting to the heart thing. Still, you can't do that either. But be sure to do that, and I'd really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Because what that does is that puts us up higher in their computers, so then the computers take notice and it puts us up in the FYP, which is the For You page, which means it shares all across Facebook, right? Just like when you hit that share button, you're trying to share it to your buddies. If you do have buddies that might be interested in this, please do that as well. The idea is to share the show as much as possible, get the word out about our little show. If you're watching from YouTube, I can't remember where the hell I'm at today. If you're watching from YouTube, same thing. Thing is, we're looking for subscribers, so please subscribe if you haven't done so already. And we have more than 1,000 videos sitting over there, all of this show, all different topics. I'm a journalist, photojournalist by trade, and I like to change it up, right? Like last night we were talking about bees. Tonight we're gonna, and tomorrow might be a different topic or something. So I like to do like current news events too. I don't do politics, but I do current news things. So yeah, that's another thing to look for. And because there's over 1,000 videos over there, it gets confusing looking them up. When I go in there, it gives me a headache. So what I've done is I've started to put them under categories and folders, so you can go in there. If you're into Nancy Matz, who comes on Fridays, you can go into her folder and find all the shows, etc., cryptids, you name it, and another topic today as well. Okay, that being said, welcome Twitch, welcome everybody. My guest tonight is interesting. I am a big fan of the book Chariots of the Gods. I'm a huge fan. That was one of the first genre books that I read. My father was really into that stuff, so I was an avid reader. Even when I was in like kindergarten, starting to read out of kindergarten and first grade, always reading, always had my nose buried in a book. And I was about, I would say, I was very advanced for reading. About 8, 9 years old when I first saw Chariots of the Gods, and I read it cover to cover at that age, and I kept it. I still have a copy of it here. And every once in a while, I'll get in the mood and start reading it. And a lot of the stuff that was in there made a lot of sense. My guest tonight has a theory that a lot of our religious icons, and this comes from ancient times, ancient religious icons, were from other planets. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Think about it now. If you look at the early photos of them, like if you go in the Bible, they've got halos on, right? Chariots of the Gods, a lot of those figures on the pyramids have halos on them, okay? Not halos, but yeah, have like round bowls, like helmets, right? They look like they have halos. So, the possibility that those halos were in fact helmets makes a lot of sense. Just like when you think about, okay, let's say that you're back in ancient times and somebody comes to you and they can do all this magical stuff, right? Or let's say, just for sheer instance, let's say James Kirk lands back during the pyramid times, right? He's got his phaser, he's got his tricorders, he's got all that stuff. Well, you're going to look upon that as being godlike because they can do magical things with that, right? It gets cold, they can shoot the phaser at the rock, warms the rock up. So you're going to look at that, and you might even think that he is a god. A good example of that, I think, was that Native American one they did on that planet where they thought he was Indian, Native American god. So I think the possibility is terrific for that. So my guest tonight, we're going to talk to him about that possibility. Okay, that some of the ancient gods actually were from other planets. All right, let me bring him in, Richard Lawrence, and we'll start and get this thing going. Okay, here we go. Hello, sir.
Hey, hi, Charlotte.
How's it going?
Great. Yeah, good. We're over here in the UK and in London at the moment. I bet it's hotter where you are, although it's
Oh
not
my
too
God,
bad here.
yes. It's 86 right now. It's going to hit 92 today, so that's cool for us.
Wow, that's cool for you. That would be a blazing, blazing heat for us.
It's been hitting like 105 to 110, so I'm really glad
Wow.
we're on a cool down period. So
Sacramento, you say, I
yes,
think.
yeah,
Yeah, right.
hotter than heck. Tell
Mm.
me about you, sir.
Me, well, I mean, like you, I was on the search from a very young age. I was listening to your introduction there.
Hmm.
And when I first heard, when I was at university, actually, I first heard this concept, and I read like you. I read *Chariots of the Gods*, and I heard the whole concept that some of the great spiritual leaders of history came from other planets.
Hmm.
I found it made absolutely perfect sense to me, and it united different religions, which I like as well, because so
Hmm.
many of these religions, they say they're the one and only way. This
Hmm.
is it. If you don't believe this, you're wrong. In fact, you might
Hmm.
even go to hell.
Hmm.
Whereas actually, if you believe, coming quite clearly, let's start with Jesus. I'm sorry if
Hmm.
this is controversial. I don't wish to offend anybody, but clearly the Star of Bethlehem was no star. I mean,
Hmm.
if you believe in the Bible, and I think the Bible's, I don't think it's 100% accurate. It's been through a
Hmm.
lot of translations and so on. But however, there's some fantastic things in there. And one of
Hmm.
the things it is an absolute UFO, um, encyclopedia, you could say. I mean, from the Old Testament up to the New Testament, Ezekiel being one of the most significant
Hmm.
cases, but also the Star of Bethlehem. Well, I mean, that was an object which we're told hovered over, I think it was a stable. Well, stars don't do that, do they?
Right.
And also, it led three men who were told were very wise. These weren't three idiots. These were intelligent, wise people, and they followed it to a stable. So, if that's true, they were led to the birth of Jesus. So, the
Hmm.
idea of Jesus being from another world, um, rather than being the one and only Son of God, when you strip away some of the things we're kind of indoctrinated into, at least
Hmm.
I was, it makes absolutely perfect sense. And then when you get to the Hindu scripts, the
Hmm.
Ramayana has one of the best UFOs on record, which is called the Pushpaka Vimana, Vimana being a word that means flying celestial vehicle in Sanskrit. And this is as ancient as it gets. This is the oldest of the Vedas, the oldest Hindu document. And one, I could go on. Sorry, I'm not letting you get a word in, but
That's okay.
that is an app that was a satellite. It carried many people from India to what is now called Sri Lanka and back again. And it was undoubtedly an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Hmm. 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 I just find this interesting because like you say, when you look back at the Bible, you look at the miracles that were performed. It makes sense that it's going to be someone from, something from another planet doing that stuff, because there's
Yeah.
no physical way to do a lot of that. Just like building the pyramids themselves.
Yeah. Well, let's
I
take the
mean,
parting of the Red Sea. I
yes,
mean,
I was
just
just
to
thinking
name
of that.
one. Yeah. I know what people do now, which is to sort of say, well, that didn't really happen. I believe in
Hmm.
the Bible, but I don't believe in this bit of it, and I don't
Hmm.
believe in that bit of it
Hmm.
because it doesn't fit with science, they think. But I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think? I mean, back then, just like I said in the intro, these aliens must have been something to see, because they had all this technology and they were able to do all this stuff.
Absolutely. But what I'd like to stress it's not just back then. I mean, it's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
Governments are desperately trying to cover it up. I saw an interesting poll actually a couple of months ago from America.
Mm-hmm.
And, as you might know, last year, maybe you and I spoke about it last year, because I was doing a lot of podcasts and shows
We
and
might
things.
have, yeah, we might have.
Yeah, because I mean, it was all coming out. It was, front page news in all the papers and etc. And it was in Congress, and men and women in Congress from both parties,
Mm-hmm.
um, absolutely standing by this, interviewing people who with tremendous experience as pilot fighters, intelligence officers, and so on, and the capabilities of the craft. I mean, just to name some of them, the ability to maneuver abruptly, the ability to move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion,
Mm-hmm.
sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures. In other words, they could break the sound barrier without
Mm-hmm.
giving any sonic boom at all.
Mm-hmm.
Positive lift, overcoming gravity. Some of these things were listed in a book, actually, I co-authored with Dr. George King, the late Dr. George King, who was he's my mentor and very dear friend. And he wrote the last book that was published in his lifetime, I co-authored with him. It's called Contacts with the Gods from Space. And,
Mm-hmm.
a shameless plug there, but I get no royalties. I donate all the royalties from that particular book towards this particular cause. And some of the things I just listed there were published in that book in 1996, and they were coming out last year from absolutely top witnesses, officers, mainly from the forces.
Fascinating. And as a young person looking through this stuff, what attracted you to this theory as you were reading through this stuff?
Well, I was on the search for truth at that
Mm-hmm.
time. I mean, I wasn't particularly looking for UFOs or cosmic matters, really.
Mm-hmm.
I was, from the age of 14, I just wanted to. I was at a school, to cut a long story short, in England, which is
Mm-hmm.
connected to a cathedral called Canterbury Cathedral, which is our number
Yes.
one the Church of England
Mm-hmm.
cathedral. And I was heading, thinking of being a priest in that church. And then I realized, for one or two reasons, that the for me anyway, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
deriding anyone else who follows any path or
Mm-hmm.
no path. That's a personal decision. But for me, I couldn't. The answers didn't compute. They didn't. There's
Mm-hmm.
things they couldn't answer. Just to give one example, if Jesus is the one and only Son of God, the one and only way, why were people born before him? What was the point of that then?
Right. Right.
Things like that, and I wasn't getting any answers from some of the most senior people in the church, because
Right.
I was confirmed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's our number one person. So I knew I couldn't do that. So I started looking, and I was looking to Eastern teachings in particular, and yoga and meditation and spiritual philosophy. And I came across the Aetherius Society,
Mm-hmm.
which put out this view that Jesus, Buddha, Sri Krishna, Lao Tse, Confucius, even actually, by the way, the Greek legend, the Catullus, the Roman poet,
Mm-hmm.
refers to a time when it was Homer, 800 BC, who wrote about a time when it was generally accepted that sky dwellers live among us.
Mm-hmm.
So all this was coming together from all traditions, and it made this just perfect sense to me, and I pursued it. I later met Dr. King, who founded the Aetherius Society. He was a great yogi as well, a great master of yoga in the highest sense, not just keep fit yoga, but I mean spiritual philosophy. And it just came together. All my questions were answered, and I've stayed with it ever since, Charlotte.
Wow. 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 I know we talked about that you talked about Jesus a few minutes ago. Let's go back to the parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Tell me
Ab-
about that and how you feel that was.
Well,
You know.
Moses, I do believe, was
Mm-hmm.
was an interplanetary intelligence too. I think there's a number of them in the Indian, in the Hindu sort of Sanskrit tradition. They're referred to as avatars.
Mm-hmm.
But the explanation of what an avatar is, it's not like the modern computer use of the word avatar. It is not really very well explained, other than to say a divine incarnation. So you have divine incarnations in many traditions, obviously Jesus being one of them, but there are native indigenous traditions where there are divine incarnations as well. But it's not explained really where they come from, why they come when they come. The whole plan, I believe there's a cosmic plan, and these intelligences come at different times to give a different aspect of truth, a different methodology. And Moses had a very, very grueling, dangerous, difficult mission to basically what was behind it, which was vital to the world, I believe, was this belief in one God, one universal God. Doesn't really matter what you call it. You might use a name from a completely different language, but that concept of one God had to be maintained. Of course, it went a lot further than that with the Ten Commandments and so on, which, by the way, were carried in a UFO according to the Bible. I just throw that in because it's a clear example of it. They call it a cloud. There's a lot of interesting clouds in the Old Testament. So his job was or task or mission was to get the people that we now consider to be Jewish, but that word didn't exist then, of course, out of Egypt and maintain this tradition of one God. And on the way, of course, he's being chased by Egyptian Pharaoh and his army, or he sent his army after him. So there was necessary to help them escape. There was an intervention, and I believe it was arranged by UFOs, that intervention, which caused what is known as the parting of the Red Sea. Otherwise, they would have been slaughtered immediately.
Right. Right.
And Moses did use powers on several occasions, and he clearly had powers, but he was also very restricted. They're all very restricted. They're all under great limitation. They're not as if, they come down with all their powers as a great cosmic intelligence and can just do whatever they wish. And this is the stupid thing about people who talk about some, I won't say all, because one has to keep an open mind, but some of the abduction cases where you get the idea that people are just taken away for sort of experimentation, taken from their beds. And don't let me, again, offend anyone who's had an experience. I'm not saying that if there's somebody watching or listening to this, that it wasn't a traumatic experience they had. I'm not saying that, but I don't necessarily believe it has a cosmic origin, because if these intelligences wished and wished to use their powers, they could easily come down and take over the planet, take over the hospitals, take over everything. Just the powers that have come out. I mean, just to name one other final thing from the Congress hearings in America last year, and by the way, 11% of Americans, according to this poll, do not believe the American government is telling the truth about this. And that's only a few months ago. It's a tiny minority who actually believe the government on this topic. And likewise in this country too, by the way. But this particular intelligence officer mentioned multidimensional existence and the possibility of these intelligences being able to, what you might say, beam me up, Scotty, in this Star Trek, actually have that kind of technology. And once you get there, then you're looking at the possibility of life on Mars. I don't know if you caught the news, this week about they discovered water under Mars. Been doing some radio shows over here on that. And so you may have covered that already, so I don't wish to repeat it. But just briefly, they reckon there's water covering almost the whole of Mars, 12 miles under Mars, possibly a mile deep. And that actually shows that there's definitely life there. They don't dispute that under the surface of Mars. It's something that Dr. King said back in the 1950s, by the way, that there's life under the surface. But once you're open to multi-dimensional existence, you've moved into a spiritual area. And I know you do a lot of psychic work, and I believe anyway. And based on the name of your station, I can see what you probably do. And so this idea of intelligences who aren't visible to us, intelligences who are living on a different dimension or a different sphere or a different frequency, if you like, it happens on this Earth, as you will know very, very well. But it can also happen on Mars, on Venus, on Jupiter, on Saturn, throughout the galaxy.
Like I said, this fascinates me. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about the Ark of the Covenant as well.
Oh, yes. Well, that's very interesting. That seems to me to be a piece of apparatus, and
Hmm.
maybe a piece of what would now be called radionic apparatus,
Hmm.
maybe, which was used possibly by these UFOs. Because from my recollection of it, when it was placed in a tent, and
Hmm.
there was, I think it said, a star over it by night or something, and a cloud by day. And these aren't normal stars and clouds.
Hmm.
They travel in a particular direction, and often people travel in them. So, like Elijah and Elisha later on, and so forth.
Hmm.
So this would suggest to me some kind of cosmic use or UFO cooperation with some kind of apparatus that was called the Ark of the Covenant. That's just my view of it.
Right.
It was helping them to make this very dangerous journey through the desert in order to preserve this great teaching, this one
Hmm.
God teaching, which didn't exist in Egypt. And this is it was very, very important to the world and still is. And this oneness concept, I mean, apart from anything else, oneness, by the way, I'm going off topic here, is a great source of happiness. If people believe in oneness, and especially if they experience happiness, according to many, many psychological studies, they'll have a much happier life.
Hmm.
And it's all the division that causes all the trouble, really.
Hmm.
Um, so this, and particularly if you have a belief in one God, so it doesn't matter what you call it. You might call it the absolute. You might call
Hmm.
it by a completely different name, like Brahma or another name. It doesn't really alter it. It's above names. It's an
Hmm.
it. I wouldn't call it he, and I wouldn't call it she particularly. It could be either of those or both. It's all that there is.
Have you been able to find drawings of these things? Because I mean, when you think about it, like if somebody was to come from the future for us, and we're trying to describe what it is, well, now we have cell phones; it doesn't matter. But let's say we weren't that far advanced. Everything we see, we're gonna kind of try and make something match it up. Like like let's say the UFO, UFO comes down, and to us, it looks like a well, that's the whole flying saucer thing, right? Because it's
Yeah,
flat like that. Back
yeah.
then, when you talk about like the Ark of the Covenant being covered in a cloud, and then this other thing going on, that's all interpretation from the people of that time, that day and age. Have you been able to gather like any written evidence or like I said, art evidence of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always being sent, and particularly photos, as you can imagine
Hmm.
nowadays, which might be the modern equivalent of the old drawings.
Hmm.
Have had drawings sent to me as well. And people do record their experiences. I mean, only actually yesterday, somebody from Canada sent me some pictures, which they wondered whether it asked me to say, did I think it was a UFO possibly, because they were little round objects in different positions on the different photos. And it's a phenomenon I've seen before, which could well be a fault in the camera, some kind of camera fault. So
Hmm.
I veer on the skeptical side. Having said that, people will say quite often, well, if you want to believe in this subject, you're more likely to see a UFO if you want to, and if you want to believe in it. I actually think the reverse is even more true. That if you don't want to see it, you don't want to believe it, it
Hmm.
troubles you, you're more likely to make up some ridiculous, and often they are completely ridiculous, explanations, which turn out to be absolute bilge, frankly,
Hmm.
some of them,
Hmm.
and sometimes lie about it, which governments are still doing. They can't get out of the habit, but nobody really believes them anymore. But coming to your point, though, yes, there are a lot of documentation. There's film footage. It's all over the internet now, of course, and
Hmm.
one has to form one's own conclusion. But some of these things, I mean, actually, I had my first flying saucer sighting last year, and
Wow.
I unfortunately, but not UFO sighting. I've had a number of UFOs. I had one at university. That was a
Hmm.
cigar shape. A flying saucer is a particular type of disc-shaped object,
Hmm.
which used to be the prevalent type of sighting. Sightings have changed now. You get many different types. And usually, I think with a sighting, it's not close enough for you to identify
Hmm.
details. But it was interesting because it happened on the day that we were celebrating the anniversary the first ever rally for the truth about flying saucers, as they were then called, in 1958 in Trafalgar
Mhm.
Square, as it's known, in
Mhm.
London. And we went and did some filming there on the anniversary. In fact, we filmed on the day before the anniversary. And that evening, Alison, my wife, and I were just stepped out of our house at 8 p.m. And there, sure enough, in the sky, is the first time we look at the sky every night. So
Mhm.
people say, "Why don't I ever see one?" You say, "Well, do you actually look at the sky much?" They say, "Well, no, not very much." I say, "Well, then you're not going to likely to see one." We actually look out, and most times we don't see anything at all. And sometimes we see Chinese lanterns, or a meteorite, or a satellite, or whatever. But on this occasion, it was the clear flying saucer. And interestingly, just to finish that story, the people who did the filming, um, two of them, and one of their wives who works with me anyway, they all had sightings within
Mhm.
24 hours of that occasion when we'd done that, and we
Wow.
did it particularly. And in fact, two of them had never had a sighting before. And we're all on the skeptical side. We all tend to think, well, could it be a satellite? Could it be a meteorite? No, could it be a drone?
Mhm.
You've got to eliminate all those possibilities. But in the end, there were four of us involved, and we all had sightings within 24 hours of celebrating that anniversary.
Wow. You made me think about my family used to have a house about 20 miles away from Mount Shasta.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very
And
significant.
our
Yeah.
back porch faced Mount Shasta, so you could sit out there
Wow.
at night, on the porch
Wow.
and watch. And it was incredible how at night there were always some lights
Yeah.
that were flying around, the near the top of Mount Shasta, and then they would
Yeah.
disappear.
Wow. Yeah.
I
That's
had,
one place I really want to get to very
yeah.
much. I really hope to try. That's one mountain I haven't visited that I'd love to
Uh-huh.
visit, Mount Shasta.
Uh-huh.
And I believe it has connections with advanced intelligences from this Earth. We tend to forget that
Mhm.
too. There are advanced intelligences from this planet, and
Mhm.
there's no doubt some of them can have craft as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
So, but they work in cooperation. And the good news about all this is that they're benign, they're peaceful, they're wise, they're very advanced. They don't wish to take over the planet, because if they did, you and I wouldn't be discussing it. It would have been
Mhm.
over a long time ago.
Right.
They
Right.
are here to help, but not force us to change, not force everyone to believe in them. The trouble is, when information is made available, and there's a lot of it, um, tremendous attempts are made to cover it up by,
Mhm.
frankly, sinister forces,
Mhm.
and that's holding everybody back. But having said that, the intelligences themselves work with the great intelligences who exist in a place like Mount Shasta. So it's a
Mhm.
great source of spirituality. Just to name one famous master of light who lives there,
Mhm.
um, Count Saint Germain, who has, sorry, not lives there, I'll rephrase that, but has spent time there, Count Saint Germain. And likewise, we have a mountain here which is called Ben Macdui in Scotland. Actually, some of us are going to visit it very soon. And there was a great female um, ascended master, because people tend to think master is a man, and it
Mhm.
isn't necessarily a man. And cosmic intelligences aren't limited to gender.
Mhm. Mhm. The other thing I was thinking about too is, of course, the ancient peoples would think of these, these aliens as gods because of the technology they had.
Yeah.
What do you think would happen if they started appearing? I mean, obviously, people say that they're getting abducted and all this, but what I mean, if one of these aliens decided to come out, as to come out and start doing all this magic stuff, how do you think people of today would react? Because we've got all this technology already.
Well, we can see how people are reacting.
Mhm.
One of our problems on planet Earth is apathy.
Mhm.
I have been broadcasting on this topic for decades, over
Mhm.
40 years actually. Ever since I was at university, I've been onto this. And when I first used to do it and go out and talk about government cover-ups in Britain as well, not just in America,
Mhm.
although I brought the first CIA paper release about UFOs to Britain in the early 80s. And I brought some papers from the Soviet Union as well under Gorbachev to Britain. But people used to think you were crazy if you even said there was a government cover-up. So
Mhm.
the the problem is like disbelief is prejudice. People feel challenged. People who hold religious beliefs feel challenged. The,
Mhm.
the, the Pope has said that he would baptize a Martian. I don't actually think Martians are going to be, in my humble opinion, queuing up for his baptism. But it does show, with all due respect to His
Mhm.
Holiness, but it does show, though, that there is a change. They at least, and I'll give them this, they are at least moving, recognizing it as an issue, which it
Mhm.
does need to be by others, the Dalai Lama and the spiritual leaders of the world
Mhm.
are going to have to face up to this, as are the political leaders. And a lot of the time, it's not convenient.
Mhm.
It's not convenient sometimes for financial interests either. I've dealt a lot with the media. I've experienced cover up in the media. I've also experienced honest people in the media who've said to me, "Look, Richard, we aren't here to publish the truth.
Mhm.
We are here to publish the truth that our readers want to read about."
Mhm.
And they think it's not this. I think they're wrong.
Mhm.
Because once you do this, I mean, I did one clip last year on this, just one, went viral, had 2 million views. I mean, this is something that people actually are interested in, and for very, very good reason. So to answer your question, what do I think? I think we can see it with our own eyes. We can see governments trying to suppress it. A lot came out last year, and
Mhm.
now Pentagon people and other people trying to close it down. Britain is pathetic. I'm talking about the government now. They
Mhm.
don't. They just don't address it. They don't say yes. They don't say no. They don't want to know because unfortunately, they're not like you and me really, and probably people who tune into your show. They aren't seeking the truth; they're seeking other agendas,
Mhm.
and this can be quite inconvenient to them. And of
Mhm.
course, these intelligences won't interfere; they won't force people to change.
Do you think too that the government is trying to do it slowly so that people aren't freaked out by it? But the truth of the matter is, they've been here all these centuries. I mean, what we're going to find out, and this is what I feel, is that when all this goes down, we're going to find out the guy across the street is an alien. That's what we're going to find out. That they've been living among us all this time. So I'm just wondering if it's, I mean, like you say, it could be the government holding back stuff, technology and all this other stuff, but could it also be a fear that people are going to be upset because they start, they find out that they've been living among us all this time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear. I think fear is behind it all. Vested interest,
Mm-hmm.
money always. Power is even bigger than money.
Mm-hmm.
Governments don't know a lot of answers. I don't think they do have all the answers. And
Mm-hmm.
that troubles them. They do not. I mean, there's never a convenient day for a government who wants to get re-elected to come forth and say, well, actually, look, we've been sitting on this stuff for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, we don't know what to do. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know who they are really. We have no connection with them, and we've got no way of dealing with them. Please vote for me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sort of fit the bill for a would-be president or politician.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that Donald Trump, I'm not saying I'm for or against him, by the way, but he did cause some of this to be released as it
Mm-hmm.
happens. And he has identified the deep state, and there may well be people in the Democrat Party too. I mean, there were a number of, not Biden, but there were some people standing for that position who were for bringing out the truth about UFOs. So there are people, but often when they actually get there into power,
Mm-hmm.
it all changes, and it's a real shame actually. But no, we just have to keep positive because one thing that is proven in history is the truth comes out in the end, and what
Mm-hmm.
we value. I mean, I always refer to um, the issue of slavery as an example because I studied the period of history when slavery was abolished in the UK at school,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hardly mentioned when I was at school. Everybody was talking about Napoleon and other things that were happening in the same period of time. Now, um, that's well known. So that even in my lifetime, there's been a massive change of approach. No, to get me wrong, no one was in favor of slavery, but it didn't seem to be even then to be a massive issue. But now
Mm-hmm.
everybody realizes it's probably the biggest thing that happened in that period. And this is the biggest thing that's happening now. This is the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing that's happening now. There's nothing bigger than this because the outcome of it. if we cooperate, and in the organization which I'm secretary of, the Aetherius Society, we do cooperate with intelligences from other worlds. I know that's a big claim. I know many might understandably not fully believe it, and I don't
Mhm.
expect them to. I mean, check it out if you wish. But that potential to do that, that potential to get their help, but every step we take towards them, they can take two towards us. That's what they say. But they can't do it without our cooperation. And when you get, lack of cooperation, repression, that serves against us. It's all part of a thing called karma.
Mhm.
As you sow, so shall you reap. We have to put out that effort. But the potential of it could solve all the problems that face us on this planet, because
Mhm.
these intelligences, they know the answers.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And I was just thinking too. I mean, this goes further back than ancient Egypt as well. I mean, the
Yeah.
Greeks. Their mythology stories. I mean, this is
Yes.
going way, way, way,
Hercules.
way back. Yeah, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And
I
throughout
definitely believe
history,
Hercules was one from another
yep,
planet.
absolutely. And
Mm.
throughout history, look back through history. I know you mentioned Jesus and you mentioned Moses. Is there any other deity that comes to mind? Well, you said
Absolutely. I mean,
Hercules, yeah.
certainly Sri Krishna definitely comes to mind.
Mhm.
In the Hindu tradition, the first avatar, not the first, but one of the earliest, even
Mhm.
before Sri Krishna, was known as Rama. And this is what the Ramayana is based on. And he traveled in this Vimana, and there are a number of Vimanas in the Vedic scripts, and they are extraterrestrial spacecraft, and they don't make any bones about it. It's just that a
Mhm.
lot of Hindus look upon it now as being a sort of mythological legend. They don't seem to really believe it happened,
Mhm.
but it's a historical document. And so, yes, I would single out Sri Krishna. I would certainly believe that Rama came from another planet and
Mhm.
traveled in extraterrestrial craft. The Lord Buddha, a wonderful intelligence, and there are said to have been 5 UFOs sighted over his birth. They didn't call them UFOs, they probably called them stars or something. I don't
Mhm.
know what. That Confucius, Lao Tse, these are some of the great intelligences, some that I don't know their name of. One that I've actually physically met, and he
Mhm.
never claimed it while he was alive, but I'm going to claim it, and that's Dr. George King himself. I believe he came from another planet, and I had the privilege of writing his biography, actually, The King Who Came to Earth, which has just gone out as an audio book. I'm not just saying that as a plug, because again, I don't
Right.
get any royalties from this. It goes to the work. But it's a unique thing because on that audio book, you haven't just got me narrating a book. You've
Mhm.
got excerpts not only of Dr. King speaking, but of Dr. King channeling
Mhm.
different intelligences over decades. And you can hear their actual voices as recorded. And you have a fantastic record there of cosmic intelligences. So, yeah, even in my lifetime, there is one, and I've had the honor to have actually met him, who I believe came from another planet. But I don't think all the people who claim it, and this is the problem you get. You get a
Mhm.
lot of claims. You get a lot of claims in mediumship as like you must know, and they're not all true. They may be
Right.
sincere. The people may well believe it. I'm not saying they're all lying, but they can be many, many other things, and the most obvious one being, uncontrolled imagination. And so that's a very difficult thing. But in the case of Dr. King, he was an absolute master of yoga. So the mediumship he did wasn't like your average medium. I do mediumship,
Mhm.
but it wasn't like the mediumship I do. He
Mhm.
entered a deep yogic condition, which had complete control over, and it was recorded. It wasn't that he couldn't control the trance condition he was in. He could switch it on and
Mhm.
switch it off in a yogic way. But in fact, on the internet, you can find an example of him on television in England in the 1950s in trance.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, they didn't know what to make of it in those days. But he was an absolute master of it. I saw him receive. I was with him physically when he received communication. I was with him when he received a communication just prior to Chernobyl, and warning of a catastrophe just
Mhm.
before it happened. And not only warning of it, but initiating a scheme, a plan to try and alleviate or reduce the impact of it. And they reckon, scientists reckon, that the impact of Chernobyl was reduced 4 times. It would have been 4 times worse than it was had it not been for a UFO. This is according to Pravda, not me.
Mhm.
Seen hovering over the particular plant that blew, and they saw a crimson beam come from this plant. This was seen by many witnesses, and they reckon it reduced the disaster fourfold. Now, that was revealed 16 years after Chernobyl happened, but Dr. King published this at the time, and I was physically with him in Arizona, actually, when that happened.
Mhm. Mhm. Have you had the opportunity to go to Egypt and look at the pyramids at all?
Unfortunately, not in this life, Charlotte.
Okay.
But have you? Have you?
I have not. I have not.
No.
I just go
But
by.
I do think there's got to be some cosmic intervention there, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. I
yeah,
just go by Daniken's photos. Just go, keep
yeah,
going back to
of
those.
course.
Look and see what he had.
Yeah, and
Um,
Peru too. He
in
detailed
Peru,
Peru. Have you been
absolutely.
down there, seen the landing site of
Yes.
the airstrip? You have, right?
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
have not. I'm just saying.
you've done. No,
Yeah,
but
I
he
agree with
details
you.
it, doesn't he? Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with you in that.
yeah.
Do you think that more scientists are going to be looking into this stuff, or is it just going to stay stagnant like it
I
is? In
do.
fact, okay.
I do, because the science, as we know, is a changing thing.
Mhm.
And it's strange, but I'd like to throw this in, if I may. I
Sure.
do think that science is a result of the state of mind of the person, the scientist. It's not
Mhm.
just cold study of statistics and facts. Now, if you
Mhm.
take Newton, just as an example of this, he walked, well, I think he walked out, he looked out of his window or something, saw an apple fall from a floor and said, gravity. Now, many
Right.
people have seen apples fall from from trees, sorry.
Right.
But they haven't said, gravity. But why did he see it? Well, Newton spent far more time practicing alchemy, which is a spiritual, mystical practice, than
Right.
he spent on science, actually. It
Mhm.
is science, alchemy, but physics, or whatever you want to call it. And I do think that altered his state of consciousness. He was also a very controversial figure who didn't accept all the doctrines of the church at the time, which was quite a dangerous thing for him to have done. And he was, I think, a Unitarian. In other words, he believed in one God. I don't think he accepted the Trinity. Might be wrong about that, but
Mhm.
anyway. My point being, a spiritual perception. In fact, Einstein said that intuition is the most valuable thing, and we've got. So it depends on not just the scientific ability, but the state of mind of the researcher. So, having
Mhm.
said that, I do think science is going to move because they're finding it inevitable. This whole multi-dimensional thing. I mean, they say there's 4% of the universe is
Mhm.
visible, and the rest is dark matter, which is invisible. They don't know what dark matter is. They just know something holding the universe together and causing
Mhm.
gravity. And so they've
Mhm.
invented dark matter. And then likewise, dark energy. Nobody knows what that is either. I
Mhm.
think I've got that wrong. Actually, 96% of the universe isn't dark matter. It's dark matter and dark energy. 4% is visible. So this is then a mystical concept. We're moving into the area of invisibility. The British astronaut, Dr. Helen Sharman, said she actually believed in life, alien life on Earth, which was invisible.
Mhm.
This whole area of visibility, and we come back to multidimensional existence, the
Mhm.
electromagnetic spectrum, if you took it to be 2,500 miles long, the amount of it which is actually visible would be 2 inches.
Wow. Okay.
2 inches. The rest is, I'm not a scientist, by the way, so
Right. 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 Right.
this is stuff I've researched into. But all I'm saying, it's moving. They can't help it. The James Webb Telescope is now
Mhm.
questioning what they thought of as the Big Bang and the timing of it. It's
Mhm.
always changing, and it's inexorably moving towards spirituality. They can't help it. If they're searching for truth anyway, and the scientist and the spiritual person should be one and the same thing. They're both
Mhm.
in pursuit of truth,
Mhm.
and the two are merging and the two are meeting. And so I do think, and it is happening, and many are moving into areas of actually, I did an interview with the Astronomer Royal here years ago,
Mhm.
a man called Lord Martin Rees. And I was staggered because I didn't expect this. But he said he believed in life on Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. Well, he stopped short of the sun. But even in this last couple of months, information, some scientists, some biophysicists, I think, are suggesting the sun is conscious based on the rhythms of its magnetism, its electromagnetic rhythms, which equate to mind, which equate to measurements of the human brain at a solar level. So the whole universe is alive. It's full of living intelligence. It's not all physical. It's not all visible. It's not all physical as we know it. It's vibrating at different frequencies. And science is starting to discover this. And it's something that the metaphysician hasn't understood so clearly, but has known
Uh-huh.
about for thousands of years. Sorry, that
You
was a
know,
long answer to your
oh no,
question.
that's okay. It kind of leads into what I'm talking about,
Right.
what I'm about to say too. One of the books I read that scared the dickens out of me was the Mojave incident.
Okay.
And the reason being is what happened after the abduction occurred and they were at home. Because as a ghost hunter, we've been trained, okay, cold spots, EVPs, all this other stuff. When you look at what happened after the fact, after they were abducted and how these aliens were able to come through the walls and do all this, the room would get very cold, the aliens would come through the walls, there'd be levitation involved. And then you think about the EVPs that we get as ghost hunters. Sometimes they're really clear. Sometimes they sound like they're far, far away and they're underwater.
Okay.
So that
That's
started
interesting.
to make me think that what if in reality we're not looking for ghosts at this point? We're looking for these aliens. People are encountering these aliens, and we're going out to deal with this.
I think you're onto something big actually on that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's where science is going to go. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to go towards this multi-frequency. Let's call it that
Yes,
existence.
multi-frequency.
Yeah, and I don't know the incident you referred to, so I'm not saying
Right.
I do at all.
Right.
But what I do think is that there is a tremendous overlap between your area of research and work,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I take it to be you're trying to help people with
Right.
these issues, and that's
Yes.
very good work. If you're helping people, thank you for that. Um, there's a tremendous overlap between
Mm-hmm.
that field and the alien field, and
Mm-hmm.
you might want to, it's up to you, of course, not up to me, but you might want to expand your arena into that, because the alien intelligence is not limited to frequency. Now, this is something that has been seen in numerous sightings, not just
Mm-hmm.
by Air Force personnel, but it has been seen by them. I mean, they've
Mm-hmm.
been tracking a UFO, and it's disappeared right in front of them. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's reappeared, according to their government reports, in the spot they were heading for. I mean, these intelligences have power over matter that is only been known by ancient magicians, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
like real, like the Flamels, for example, in France in the 14th
Mm-hmm.
century, who had great alchemical power, so it is said. There's a tremendous alignment, really, between their technology
Mm-hmm.
and what would at one time been called magic or alchemy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a big mistake, actually, by science, I think, to throw out the mystical side of alchemy and just focus on the physical side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think hopefully now the two are starting to come together again. But in
Mm-hmm.
your work, I mean, there are other realms. I'm a medium myself. I've had a
Mm-hmm.
number of contacts. I had a very interesting visitation just a few months ago from somebody from Tibet. Sorry, I actually lived in India, but he was Tibetan, and he just came to see me in my sitting room. I didn't know. I looked at him. I didn't recognize him, but I noted the face.
Mm-hmm.
And he came with a wonderful kind of message. It was very short. It was quite curt. It wasn't very, he wasn't effusive. He was quite blunt, but lovely vibration, and left. But I found this individual. I knew what his name. He gave me his name. His name was Lama Govinda, and I thought that's strange because Govinda is a Hindu thing. It's not a Tibetan thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
Lama Govinda. That's all. Then I found out there actually was a Lama Govinda. There were two actually. One was an American man who used the name, and the other was this Indian man. And so then I looked up the Indian man, and sure enough, that was the person who I recognized him. And he passed on, I think, last September. Now, I'd assumed he'd actually projected to me from Tibet or India, but he hadn't. He actually had passed on a few months ago. I found out later by looking into this particular case. So there's an example of somebody very much from this earth, not a ghost, actually, a very advanced person who, in his lifetime, I looked into his lifetime after that, and he spent years, I mean, not weeks, but years in meditation sometimes. He was a highly spiritual individual, very revered in his community, but he came with a particular purpose, and I know what that purpose was, and I welcome it. But he was traveling from another's frequency to see me. And in the same principle, this can happen on, say, Jupiter, Saturn. So there can be no life on Venus because of I think there's 59 planets they've identified in the galaxy which have hospitable conditions that they know of those particular planets. But they think there are probably 40 billion in the galaxy that could be hospitable to life as we know it. But that's just life as we know it. It's life as we don't know it, life on a higher frequency. And that's where there's a big link up, possibly, between your work on a very terrestrial level, you might say, and the search for extraterrestrial life.
Yeah, I think we're going to find out there's a link there. The other thing that comes to mind during our talk today is, I've always felt too that our technology, every year they're coming up with new stuff, and my thought was always been like these aliens visited us back way back, Greek, during the Greek and during Egyptian times. And do you think that maybe they were holding? I mean, we saw these miracles, obviously, with Moses and Jesus and stuff. But do you think that there was a holdback of technology because they were watching to see when we were ready to accept and be able to utilize this? Where our minds were working in that direction.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I think you're really onto something. I fully agree with that point. They are waiting for us to change, and they have incredible patience and tremendous love, actually. I mean, to even bother to go through this. I mean, if you take the Push Parker Vimana that I mentioned, nobody knows how old that is because the record is like I think it's the oldest piece of writing on Earth, I believe. And it's, of course, before that, it was carried through memory. They had perfect memories, the early Vedic writers. And they were hearing it from legend or from history, actually, not legend, but history, before it ever came to them. So this could go back to Atlantis. It wouldn't surprise me at all. It could be that old, and carried down through the generations. So there's a case of an intervention, a retrieval of a spacecraft. It's a fascinating story. To me, very believable. Obviously, there are details in the way it's told I wouldn't think were right, like with the Bible. Anything that goes through thousands of years of editing and passing on is subject to error. But the basic essential story makes absolutely perfect sense. And yes, they are waiting for us to change. Every now and then, the ludicrous thing, in fact, the Pentagon has used this. They'll come up and say, these craft that have been sighted are just experiments that we've been doing. And what you're seeing is very advanced Earth technology. That was blown out of the water last year. I mean, you mentioned at one point, you said, picking up people from under the water. Well, one thing these craft can do, and this is according to government records in America, Pentagon records, is move through different kinds of matter. So they can be underwater, they can be in the air, they can be in the sky, they can, go out through the Van Allen belt. I mean, they can travel at super velocities. There is no way, there's no known craft that can do that, never mind disappear and reappear. I mean, one CIA paper, for example, that I brought over was from the 70s, 1976. And it was in Tehran, actually, and it was a CIA paper, and it described how an American jet, again, this sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. It's a CIA document, it's a report by a pilot, was chasing a UFO, and it was instructed to fire a missile at this UFO.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as it got within range of this UFO, or I'm going to say extraterrestrial IFO, because it identified it,
Mm-hmm.
its weapons control panel went dead, and they couldn't fire it. And as soon as it got out of range, the weapons control panel was immediately activated. So therefore, they know they can first of all they can read the minds and know what's going on. Number one. Number two, they can immobilize the equipment, and then they can reactivate it. Number
Mm-hmm.
three, what does it tell us? That they are peaceful. And this is a biblical story in itself. It just happens to be a CIA paper. This is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
One that I brought out of Russia. And this was released by TASS. This was a formal release if people remember Gorbachev, or they've heard of Gorbachev. There was a period called Glasnost. The Russians tried to release information openly. My God, they got badly treated when they did that by the Western media. I know, because I was there. And I actually was in a TV studio, and a man in Britain, if anyone's heard of him, called Robert Maxwell, some
Mm-hmm.
people will have heard of him here, came in, and the interview was stopped because of him and didn't go out. So who knows who he was working for? I don't know. But anyway, it was stopped. I actually did it later. But this described a UFO landing in a park in front of dozens of witnesses, recorded, straight report, and without going into it all, a boy in the crowd that was very kind of bit frightened was caused by an alien intelligence, according to this report, who'd stepped out of the craft, to disappear and then to reappear again, and when he felt better, and the craft left indentations in the ground. So this another so-called, that would be called a miracle
Mm-hmm.
in the Bible or in the Hindu scripts, but now it's some kind of technology that this
Right.
individual had that we don't have on Earth.
What comes to mind, it makes me smile, was, I don't know if you're into Star Trek or anything like that. There's a particular one where they're back in the 30s, and they're stuck in this room, and Kirk, I think, wants Spock to build some kind of computer so he can
Right.
do research on what's going on. And Spock looks at him and he says, and I think this goes for the aliens, like you say, how patient they are, waiting for us
Yeah.
to catch up to them. He looks at Kirk and he says, "What, in this zinc-plated vacuum tube of a culture?" I mean, that sets it right there. How
Yeah,
far
absolutely.
advanced they were, what they probably thought of us for years and years because we were so backward. Even though there's theories that there was actually electricity and light bulbs back in ancient Egypt, way
Mm.
back when. But that's what I think of when we talk about them being so patient to wait. Is that one segment of Star Trek where Spock's just like, "You expect me to build with this crap, with the stuff we have
Yeah,
here?
yeah,
That's
brilliant.
crazy." Yeah.
Absolutely. And they are, as you say, very, very patient and
Mhm.
extremely tolerant. And, people on this earth are either they don't like it. Some,
Mhm.
and not everyone. There's a lot of people
Mhm.
out there who are interested. I mean, millions of people who
Mhm.
really are very interested. And more and more are getting interested, and more are believing. And most people do now believe, according to polls,
Mhm.
in aliens and in UFOs, and in which they didn't used to. So
Right.
it's progressing at a slow, painfully slow rate, but it's progressing, which is
Mhm.
very good. But a lot of people, as I'm sorry to say, and I said earlier, are just apathetic. They just
Mhm.
can't be bothered. They're far more interested in getting a mortgage and getting a job and going to a concert to see Taylor Swift or whoever. Nothing against
Mhm.
Taylor Swift, but whatever it happens
Right.
to be, this is
Right.
what's important to them, and
Right.
this is what they think is important. And they don't think this subject, which could be globally transformative, could
Mhm.
save our planet, is important. That's not a priority. And I'm sorry if that's offensive to anyone, but I
Mhm.
think it's pretty clear. But I do think if the world as a whole really changed and people are starting to and really started to one thing that's good is that people actually don't necessarily believe governments anymore, and they did used
Mhm.
to pretty much, even in
Mhm.
my lifetime. Just because they say something is not necessarily true. And now, if I went out and said, "Look, governments tell you the truth," people would think I was a loony, probably. Things have
Mhm.
changed, but in the old days it was different. So that's good. So if they go out and demand the truth, if they really spend time, there's a story, there's a wonderful book, Autobiography of a Yogi, by Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. And he tells the story of where somebody went to seek the truth from a guru, a yogi, and this yogi took hold of this would-be student, put his head in I think, a basin of water or a bucket of water, and held it there, which of course you'd be in trouble. No, that yogi would be straight into
Right.
prison nowadays. But, in those days, they were tough days. And pulled him out and said, "What did you want most when your head was in the water?" And he said, "Oh, air, master." And the guru said, well, when you can say truth, then I'll take you as a student. Go. And that was the kind of tough attitude they used to have. So we don't have to go that far. But when people really, really want the truth, they will get it.
Absolutely. Richard, this hour went by so fast. I learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte.
Thank you
Been
for.
a pleasure.
I would love to have you on again to talk more.
Please, please.
I
Yeah,
could
I know
pick your
you're
brain all day.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to. Love
What's
talking to you.
next? Yeah, what's next for you?
Well, we're as I say, this audio book of The King Who Came to Earth is now out on Amazon, and we're going to start. We haven't started promoting that or even telling people. In fact, you're the first person, the first show. I've done a few shows, but this is the first show that I've mentioned it on, so people can find that on Amazon. And we just want to let people know about it because it's an audiobook like no other audiobook that's ever been produced, because it has actual, it's not just, as I say, my voice. I'm the main narrator, and there were two authors, myself and Brian Kniep, but on it I do narrate, as does Brian. But the most interesting thing is these exact excerpts, not just from Dr. King himself, who, as I repeat, I do believe himself came from another world, but also from those who spoke through him. And those messages it's not just the words, they're very powerful, and they are, as I say, it's an audio book, the like of which has never, ever been produced before.
Fantastic. How can people find you, sir?
I've got a website, richardlawrence.co.uk. Please come to it. There's some interesting clips. This will be going up on it as well, Charlotte, if that's cool with you.
That's fine. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of links there. I've got an event in London coming up next month, probably 2 events even, maybe, which is another thing I do, which we haven't spoken about today, about unlocking your psychic powers, because that was my international bestseller, Unlock Your Psychic Powers.
There you go.
Book.
Cool.
30 years ago. It's still out now in several countries. So I run events, and the idea of those events, but you've got to be really in London. If I ever come there, I'll let you know. But your listeners and viewers must be all over the world, I suppose.
Yes.
And what we do, we make sure that everybody who comes has an experience, so they go out knowing they have psychic powers.
That's awesome. All righty, sir. Well, you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, Charlotte.
Have a great one.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, I love learning stuff. I learned so much from him. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Tomorrow I'll be back at 6:30 p.m. Pacific with usual show stuff, so join me tomorrow. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. Just trying to get the word out about our little show. All right? Well, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great evening.